Test. Good morning. Hello there, feet first. First and feet first. How are you today? Are you able to hear me? How is the audio? Are you able to hear the music and my voice? You're good? Awesome. It's a tad quiet. I don't think, for some reason the microphone won't let me turn, my voice is quiet. Let me try something here. I'm doing good. I'm in the garage today. I'm using Streamlabs. Yeah, it's very similar, Streamlabs OBS and OBS. For some reason it seems like my microphone is capping out though, which is strange. Let me... Microphone. Yeah. Okay, I guess I'll just have to maybe try and talk a little louder or see if I can move the microphone a bit closer. It's probably about as good as I can do, so hopefully it's not too bad. Let me see if I can add a boost on it. Sounds fine for you, Ma Shakti? Cool, thank you. It's not too quiet? Okay, awesome. I had added a compressor. I could try this too, is that might be a little bit better there. Yeah, there we go. That looks a bit better. Perfectly clear, and the music is a nice volume. Cool, thank you, Ma Shakti. Who was my first follower? Well, probably Ma Shakti, my wife, was probably my... Actually, I'm not sure if she was my first follower. She was my first follower outside of Twitch, for sure. But my very first follower, that... I'll have to look that up. I'll have to check. It is possible that it was a friend of mine named Aries. I know he was one of the first people to come into the stream. You followed on June 1st? Cool. Yeah, that's over a month now. It's crazy that I've been doing the stream now for a month. I guess this is day 7 of the Twitter stuff, so we've come quite a long way. So today, where we're at with this. So this is the Twitter stuff that we've been working on. We've got this index page, main.js and style.css. So it's only 3 files. This README is just some information. There's nothing, it doesn't have anything to do with the site. It shows up on the GitHub page though, so that there's information about how it was built and that. But this website is actually just using these 3 pages, index for the layout, styles for the styles and the look and feel, and then JavaScript now we're adding for the functionality, and we just started adding that. So I can't remember feet first if No, Mock Shakti was on the 20th. Yeah, she's fairly new to Twitch, just created her account. It took a while for him to convince me to set up a profile, yeah. Dota to Attitude. Hello, how are you? Do I write tests like functional tests, like programming tests? I have done some with Jest, but for this particular project, we won't be doing any testing, like test-driven development or unit tests. I've dabbled around with it a little bit. I think it's an interesting concept, and I think it's really good for, it could potentially be good for really big projects. I haven't worked on it a ton for myself because most of the development I've done has been on my own, but I've definitely played around with the test-driven development. I have some tests that are running Monte Carlo simulations, small ones, of like 900-ish iterations, and they're running slow as a result. They're JavaScript tests, so like Monte Carlo simulations, so you're just working on like a gambling, sort of like online gambling program of some sort. Well, the Monte Carlo kind of simulations gives it away as a kind of a gambling, maybe game or suite of some sort. Monte Carlo can be done for a lot of stuff, yeah. Cool. Yeah, it's not something that I've worked a whole lot with. It's like a pick your hand type of app. Interesting. So I saw there was another person I was watching a week ago or so that he was building a kind of a fun gambling game for the chat where people could bet their chat dollars and things and win prizes that don't mean anything except for fun. This is for Texas Hold'em, cool. Yeah, it's not, I haven't done any big tests like that with like huge iterations or anything like that. If it's getting slow though, it could be possibly a memory leak issue or some kind of runaway raceway conditions in there somewhere. Do the tests all pass eventually? Those Monte Carlos are gonna take a second, yeah. Problem is tests are supposed to be fast. Can't have a bunch of 1 second tests. Yeah, no, definitely. Well, it depends, like, because a test ideally is going to be run only at specific conditions or when you're going to be launching a new piece or something like that, or an iterative test. So in theory, I'm not sure if it's a huge deal for tests to be a little bit slower from my own perspective or my opinion, but that might be different from different people's perspectives for sure. Use Wallaby, so your tests are always running. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's not a technology that I'm familiar with myself. One of the principles is that it's fast. Yeah, for sure. It's one of the ideal principles is that it's fast because you're only ever adding exactly the functionality that you need. So in theory, as long as your tests are iterative and you've continued to add the content with that same functionality, yes, in theory everything should be fast. They have to be fast. Every time you write a line, you run the code. Yeah, interesting. So if your tests take 15 minutes to run, that would really slow down dev. Yeah, for sure. So is this a requirement for the project, or is this a personal project, or something that you're working on for work? Personal project, cool. And are you doing the test-driven development kind of to learn test-driven development, or is there a functional reason for doing the test-driven development? You're loving test-driven dev? Cool, that's good to hear. Yeah, I haven't talked to too many people who have worked in that, so I've like I say, I've played around with it a little bit. it's one of those things where I've got so many projects that I'm kind of working on right now, and that takes such a huge amount of energy to put towards actually learning the test-driven development, or at least it seems anyway. Maybe it's not as big of a barrier to entry as it seems once you get used to it. How fast did you find like switching to that mentality of doing the test-driven development worked? I'm doing it because I want to learn it, really like it. Yeah, cool. You have a coach. Oh yeah, that really helps. Yeah. Anytime, like, I find, especially with coding, just having one other person that knows, even like has dabbled in what you're trying to learn is hugely beneficial. First I wrote the tests to get used to writing tests. Yeah, but that has pitfalls. So writing the tests to get used to writing tests has pitfalls. And he got me writing some tests first, which made things easier. Yeah, I think it's like a lot of these concepts that are like a little bit more abstract. It's kind of, you have to do them and then practice them, and then eventually something clicks. It's even some of the design patterns with React. That's what I mostly develop in now. And it's really helped me having 15 years of coding experience to come into React, because a lot of the stuff that React does is like, oh, I know why this problem's being solved or why it's done this way. So it really helped me be able to grasp some of the concepts that are being used in React. If you write a bunch of code, then write tests, that's very different. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Your test-driven development is in React. Yeah, that's what... it seems it's a pretty common industry standard right now that a lot of, especially bigger or really complex systems are switching over to that test-driven development. So I'm interested to explore it more for sure. What would you say is the biggest advantage, like, or could you pinpoint an advantage of using test-driven development to design the product, if that makes sense? So we left off, we created this panel here and we styled it, and then we just started adding the JavaScript. So obviously mobile styling hides that thing there, so we've only got this here. Maybe I'll just do this for the sake of having it up, and then we'll have to switch back and forth. But now basically we have this panel that shows up. We can follow and unfollow and follow and unfollow here, and that's all we added for the JavaScript. So today I think what I'll do is work on positioning this div. So I think I'll write a function that will take in an element and then put it above or below. That's the trickier part, is figuring out how to show it. So if I hover over, if I hover over here, it shows up below, but if I'm scrolled to here, if I have enough room above, maybe not. If I don't have enough room below, it shows up above. So a couple different ways that we want to do. We probably want to figure out the content, so it probably loads the content first, then decides how big that div is. We've only got one piece of content in there right now, so it's going to show this exactly what it is, but we'll kind of build this in steps. So we'll assume that eventually we're going to be loading content into this, but at first we'll just use static content, and then we'll write a function that'll take in whatever element we're wanting, either whether that's a click. So on real Twitter, this one here is a click to open up this menu, and these ones are hovers. And sorry about the background noise. We've got laundry going on one side and trucks leaving on the other side, so hopefully it's not too disruptive. Fewer defects, and it's supposedly faster, yeah, or at least I think it helps your design to test-driven development. Yeah, I think, like, from a conceptual perspective, it seems like that writing only the stuff that is important to make the app function seems like, in theory, it would be very effective at making sure you have really clean code. It feels like it would be it's a very practical way to do it. So it might seem like it takes out some of the creativity, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're writing, if you're wanting to write very, very clean and code that is easily readable across a team, because then everybody on the team kind of knows how it's doing. So it really is good for, it seems like it could be good for conventions, for actually applying a specific style of code. You also get nearly 100% test coverage usually. Like the whole app gets covered by tests. Every line of code has a test testing it, yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting, like it seems on the surface like it's writing a bunch of extra code, so it seems like you're adding extra work, although that work saves so much time in the future. So I think that's one of the things, like, I would say in a team environment or from a software development and perspective, it makes complete sense. And when you've got the budget and the ability to do that, it seems like some of the smaller projects that I work on that are for clients who may not really understand software development, they just want something very simple. If I was really proficient at it, it might be helpful, especially for scalability, but it's hard. It's a harder sell, I think, to. One of the things I run into with freelancing that's tough is that there's a whole bunch of stuff that should be done on the back end that is really hard to sell to clients. So like when you can get the front end developed and show them what it's going to look like, and then you have to tell them, well, it's still going to take another 5 months of development to get things working, but they're not going to see any difference because it's all back end stuff. It can get tricky. Some people understand it, some people don't. And I just saw, thank you for the follow, Dota2 Attitude. I appreciate that. That's great. Welcome to the stream. The extra code is really the tests, yeah. The ones I just wrote for this function isn't that much longer. Let me count. 45 lines of testing code, yeah. And that, in theory, those 45 lines of code that you write could save you a ton of time in debugging, especially with stuff that's like doing a lot of data calculations and transformations of data. It's things like a gambling simulator of some sort, because there's so many calculations in there that it's almost impossible to keep track of in your head or figure out if those things are being accurate. So the tests, I absolutely see how the benefit for anything that's really data driven like that. 90 lines of the function, yeah. So yeah, 50% of the code is extra. This particular section would have more tests than typical because of the data calculations. Is that why it would have more than typical? Because of the complexity, yeah. So I think the way that I will handle this, we've got, what we've done with it now is we have just a div that's called pop-up. And I think I'll just end up using one div for the pop-up. So I think I'll actually give this an ID of pop-up as well. And that way we can get a reference to it in JavaScript. Query selector pop-up. So then we have that. I haven't went in and actually updated my prettier. I've stopped using semicolons because I actually really like the cleanliness of the code without semicolons, but as you can see, my habits have still, my 15 years of semicolons have still creep in there all the time. So I want to update my prettier to on save, it'll remove them, but just haven't had the chance to get in and do that yet. So that gives us a reference to that. So then we can actually create a function called place popup, and it is going to take in an element And I think that's all eventually it'll probably take in maybe a content or something like that to update the content, but for now we'll just have it place it. And we'll just make this so that we can have a hover pass the element to the to this function. You like semicolons? Yeah, I did for the longest time, and I had a real aversion to getting rid of them because I had been writing them for so long, and I really liked semicolons, and they just made sense to me, and they felt like comfortable because, like I say, I'd been writing them for 15 years. But then I started looking at code that doesn't have them, and I don't know, it just somehow looks cleaner to me. Like, yeah, I feel you 100%. It took me a long time to even embrace the idea. I was like, what do you mean no semicolons? Of course we have to put semicolons in. That's how you know that the line ends. And I don't know, I guess too, like, more that I've been doing code, the more fun I've been having with actually making the code look cool. I think it's kind of a neat art form to work in this code that only other coders really see. Everybody else sees this front-end stuff here, but this becomes kind of my canvas in a way. So playing around with it, maybe I'll go back to semicolons sometime, maybe I won't. But I've been doing some game development lately, writing in the Godot engine, which is kind of it's GD script in there, but it's similar to Python, which doesn't use semicolons. And it kind of sold me on it just because the cleanliness, it just looks, to me, it looks like a little bit cleaner. What I'm writing now, very messy. Yeah, code gets very messy very quickly. I think it's because I'm learning TDD. Yeah, it's absolutely, like, when you're learning a new thing, it's always going to be messy, and also learning how to write cleaner. And it's just too much to fix at once. And it always is, like, if time was not a concern as far as development goes, for, like, if I was building a product completely on my own and there was no time frames and it wasn't this, I would always write my code twice. I would write the code, build the system as best as I possibly could, and then I would start with a fresh canvas and rewrite it, because that gives me the best way, because then I've solved all the little pieces. Because as you build things, I find, like, as I build things, I find it's like, here's a technique. Okay, we'll use this technique. This works really good, but then that technique doesn't work for this particular application. So then you kind of tweak that a little bit, and then you find all these ones, and then eventually when you get something that's pretty close to working, you find that it's like, okay, this is the way that I handle this. Here's how I handle messages all the way across the system, alerts. Here's how I handle pop-ups. Here's how I handle retrieving data from things. And those methods change as you learn two new techniques and depending on the application. But then at some point you kind of figure, like, okay, here's a really good way. That's why frameworks are really good for those types of things. And React's an interesting, some people call it a framework, some people don't. It's the Create React app, I would say, is the closest part to a framework, but React itself is kind of a new version of jQuery in a way. It's a DOM manipulation library. So it allows extreme flexibility, so it's not actually trying to tell you how to manage your code. Then you can get into things like Gatsby and Next.js, which are the frameworks that are using React, which those have a little bit more opinionated on, like, here's how you create a page, here's how you do this, whereas React is pretty open. Hamaden, hello, and nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Is there a magic pill to learn JavaScript? I'm still learning CSS. Should I go to JavaScript or PHP? I wouldn't say a magic pill. I think, like, the magic pill is practice, really. If you want to learn JavaScript, I would say, especially coming from CSS, like CSS, I think everybody should learn HTML, CSS first. You like my beard? Thanks, man. Thank you, Hamaden. Yeah, I think everybody should learn HTML and CSS, because that's the building blocks of the display, and then you use JavaScript to manipulate the HTML, CSS. So the more you know about HTML and CSS, the more you can do with JavaScript. So the path that you're doing with you're still learning CSS is a great way to start, for sure. As far as getting into JavaScript, I would just design something cool, very simple, like even like use CodePen. CodePen's a really fun playground. There's also Code Sandbox and a few other ones, but it's a nice sort of little development thing if you're not familiar with it. They do offer little challenges and things like that, so that's kind of a fun thing. You can look at the challenges that they have, and sometimes they'll have ones that require JavaScript, or you can try and do these challenges using JavaScript. So that's one way. So stack widget. So your challenge: build a stack widget, a stack of elements in Flutter. And maybe this is something after we do the Twitter thing, it might be fun to do, is actually just come into CodePen and pick one of the challenges and work on them together. But yeah, so stack widget, your challenge: build a stack of elements in Flutter. I'm not even familiar with Flutter, so I won't go into this one here, but this is a really good way to start to learn these things. But pick things that are simple, just move things around. Actually, what we're going to be doing here in a minute, when we get back to things here, placing this pop-up. This is a really simple thing that's very common in JavaScript to do, that gives you a lot of tools as far as DOM manipulation. So stick around and we'll get into that as well. Another thing too that I haven't played too much with this, but it seems like a really fun, cool way to learn JavaScript, is Screeps. So this is an MMO sandbox game for programmers, and basically what it is it's an MMO game where you've got your units that you're trying to set up and defend your base and collect resources, but each unit is a Screep, and you have to write JavaScript to actually tell the Screep what to do. So what this does is allows you to say, okay, this Screep here will go and collect these resources, but then you can write a function that says, if there's an enemy within this range, go and fight that enemy. And then you could write other Screeps that are maybe faster, so they say like, always move in this direction, always go faster to here. If there's enemies, just run past them. You could write something that's like, these three here will always stick around this one big guy who's really good at defending them, and then if an enemy comes, then the big guy goes and defends them, and these three here are going to continue to collect resources. So it's kind of a fun way to play with JavaScript, and they've got kind of tutorials and things that you can learn along with it, so I would check that out as well. So first, let's just see if we can move this around. So what we could do for that is, or let's get the element. So whatever element we're passing in, let's get a reference to that. So we can use elm.getBoundingClientRect, I think it is, and we'll just let's get the position, and we'll log the position. And then what I'm gonna do is we've given all of these a class, I believe, of profile image. Profile image. This one doesn't, because it's a bit different, but all of these other ones, that one's even profile image. That could be a problem. I'll have to check that out. But let's just basically, we'll get all of the profile images. So profile images equals document.query selector all. And we're just using vanilla JavaScript here, so no libraries, there's no React, there's no jQuery, there's no nothing. So this is all just in the browser, basic JavaScript. And that's the other thing too that I would recommend. Learn basic JavaScript, because it really helps you understand under the hood what React's doing, or these other pieces, and it lets you, when you come into a problem with something like, while you're building a React app, if you know the underlying JavaScript, it makes it way easier to solve, and you can do some more unique things with it too. So we will get all of the profile images. I think, whoops, there goes that semicolon again. Profile image. And then do a for each image, whoops. And for each one, we will, add an event listener, mouse over, and we will place pop-up e.target. And so let's just see if that works. So let's move this down below. And let's see if, so we got image.add event listener is not a function because I didn't capitalize that. Blackbird Slip, thank you, nice to see you. Thanks for stopping by. Do you need a CS degree to be a successful coder? No, I would say not at all. I don't have a degree at all. I'm self-taught. And to be honest, my opinion, a computer science degree is really good for like extreme engineering, if you want to get into artificial intelligence, if you want to get into theoretical coding. But if you want to be a coder, I wouldn't actually recommend, this is my opinion, but I wouldn't recommend going to school for it. It'll give you a really good base to work with, and it works, like I say, in the theoretical and the academic standpoint. But if you're wanting to get into a job working as a coder, 4 years of schooling, things are going to change a whole lot in that time. But you want to work at Google. If Google is your target and you're wanting to get in, then they're loosening up. So they were very much that you needed to have a computer science degree to get into Google. And I would say that you will have a lot of competition without a computer science degree. So if Google's the target, you might need to go that route. But I would say too, there must be like entry-level stuff at Google as well that can get you in. I think your portfolio really becomes the proof that you can do that work. So what is better, an extremely good portfolio or a computer science degree? I'm not really sure on that. I think having either is not a bad idea, but having a portfolio, like a really good, solid portfolio of work, is definitely something you'd need, even if you did have a computer science degree, I would suggest. So work on your portfolio and see if that will let you maybe get some funding to be able to get a computer science degree, or try and find a company that would be willing to put you to school to do the computer science degree. Might be a good approach too. But you definitely don't need a computer science degree to be a coder, a successful coder. So let's see, is this working? So we've got this place pop-up is not defined because place pop-up, because I spelt it wrong. That's why it's not defined. So in your desire to work for Google, what is your kind of goal as a coder? Like what is that you want to be working on? Is it just because Google's Google and you want to be on like the front line of tech, or is there something specific career-wise that you're interested in doing? So there we go. So now when we hover over this what this is doing, so we get a reference to all of the profile images, so anything with a class of profile image, and then we loop through each one, and we just give it a reference of image. So this for each is basically saying loop through, give me this variable, pass it to this function, and so then this variable becomes the profile image, and then we're adding an event listener, so we're listening for the mouse over event, and then we're grabbing the event, passing it to the place pop-up function and just the e.target. The reason that we do it this way, so we could actually, another way to do this that would be totally valid would be to have it like this. So then we would say e.target. And this would work exactly the same. And then we could actually make this cleaner, where then all we'd have to do is say place pop-up. And this is why I really find code interesting, is that, so these two different things, now this is going to do exactly the same. And on the surface, this looks way cleaner because we're just saying this. But the reason that I actually would go with the other way, where we do it this way instead, is that this makes this function more reusable. So this is always, this, if we do the pop-up, place pop-up, and we expect an event, then we have to know that this can only be called through an event listener, like a click or a mouse over. But if for some reason we wanted to place the pop-up for another reason that wasn't associated with an event, this makes this function more accessible, because now we can pass it any element. So let's say we clicked something over here on this screen and we wanted to make that pop-up show up in the center. We could put a dummy div in the center and pass that element in there. We could also pass in coordinates too. So we could actually place pop-up by coordinates. So that would be another function. But this way here allows us to basically place it in reference to any other element on the screen. And so does that make sense why I would do this method over the e.target into here? Google is Google. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, it's a very cool, there's a lot going on with Google and that, and I've for sure had my own dreams of working at Google, and I think that there's companies that are doing really cool stuff outside of Google that are maybe more accessible and might even be more fun, actually. But I totally get it. Google is Google. You're right. Add this YouTube song, Google My Bulbul, in your portfolio, man. I think you'll like it. Google My Bulbul. Okay. I will make note of that for later and check it out. Thanks for the reference. So now with that, as you can see, basically the mouse over shows us this DOM rect. So we get the x coordinate, the y coordinate, the width, and the height. And then, here we can expand this. We get the top. So this is, I believe, let's just see. So if I hover over here, what changes? 284. And if I go here, top is 417. Yeah, so top is from where the scroll top is. So if we were to move this down, or we're putting it here, this is going to be a low top number, 284. And then if we were to scroll up and hover over the same one, then we get a higher top number. Ooh, maybe I hovered over the wrong one. Yeah. So it's either top from the scroll or top from the parent. I think it must be top from the scroll. So let's just see. This is the John Doe liked one. Let's move this up and let's hover over that again. It was 417. Now it is 284. Yeah. So and then our x and y is based on the parent div, so I believe, maybe not, maybe it's from the top. So I think it also depends on if the element is position absolute, position relative. It may change this, but we'll play around with it and see. But this gives us our positioning. So we will use, let's just take and move the pop-up to the same positioning. So, or at least close to. So we'll take pop-up and we will say let's see. You know what? I'm gonna have to look it up. I can't remember. And here's the thing too, like, doesn't matter how much you do this stuff, there's so much information to keep track of that even basic things like this, like I want to change the styling of this, I have to look it up occasionally. If I'm doing a bunch of this work, I'll remember it, but I haven't done this in a little while, so let's just look up JavaScript style. I just can't remember if it's a function, so style.color. Okay, yeah, so I think it's usually, yeah, so background color. So it's very much, it's usually style and then the CSS property, so it'd be background color, except because you can't do dashes in the property names, they do camel case and camel or Pascal? Camel case, I think, instead, where lowercase first letter and then uppercase afterwards and remove the dash. So in this particular case, we want left, and we want it to be pos.left. And then pop-up.style.top, pos.top. And let's see what that does. What are the benefits of using Vanilla.js in this project? So the benefits, I would say, always of Vanilla.js is that it's cross-browser compatible. So you're getting that compatibility, you're using the core functionality of the browser, so it makes it very functional. At the end of the day, all of the React, Svelte, all of those libraries, they do compile actually down to vanilla JavaScript. So you are writing JavaScript, you're just kind of using a tool to create it. The reason that I'm using JavaScript here is because I'm specifically, that's my intention for this stream here, is to learn the basics. So we went through HTML and CSS learning this. Now we're applying it JavaScript to this. I may take the same project and go into React and show how I would do this exact same thing using styled components in React. That might be another thing, another direction that we go with this, but that was basically the reason. It wasn't necessarily a benefit, it was just the reason for doing this was to teach vanilla JavaScript and to practice basics as well. Isn't it a bad practice to use .style to change CSS or add CSS attributes? Changing class with class name isn't better. So, to the best of my knowledge, it's not bad at all. Actually, that this is how most animation libraries work. That when if you're using something like Framer Motion or you're using GSAP or any of the animation libraries, that's actually what they're doing. So they would be doing the style.transform and then equals translate y, and they would give the number. So it's not a bad thing to, in my opinion, to use these here. It's something that's pretty common. The reason switching a class name, if you have another class to do it, that's a good way to do it too, is to add a different class. But because we specifically want to change based on whatever we're hovering on, we couldn't create a class for each one of these positions. So we want to actually put a specific number in there. Does that make sense? So let's see what's happening. So it's not actually adjusting it. So let's take a look. So we have this pop up here. Let's just first adjust so we do have a top and left, and I think it's because of the pixels, because we're having a number. So if I set this to left of 50 pixels, so that is moving. So that tells me that it is working, but I think it's actually the pixel unit. So if we were to look at, let's put this console log back in here. If I can type. Yeah, so the left that we're getting is 187.5, right, 237.5, and so this is pixel units, but it's not putting the pixels. So I think we have to actually put plus pixel and plus pixel on here, and let's see if that works then. There we go. So obviously this isn't exactly where we want it. We still need to make some adjustments, but you can see that it does move to that position. And now this is one way to do this. Another way that I might do this that's a little bit cleaner would be to use, a little bit more modern too, is to use something like this, so a template literal. So we can do here px. So this here does the exact same thing as this here. It just, for this example, it's not too big of a deal because it's just one thing adding to another. But if you start to get strings where you have a bunch of variables in there that you want to place, this makes it a lot easier. And so the important thing for this is to use the backtick, not the single quote. And then you just give your $, curly brackets, and put the variable name inside, and then the rest of it is you're really creating a string, and then you're just replacing the variable using this syntax. And again, it's the backtick, so above the tab key, not single quote. So how can we improve this? So when I hover over here, and so there's one thing too, is that it's kind of moving because it must be based on the mouse cursor. So let's try something here. Let's try current target and see if that improves it. It's the same thing. Sometimes current target works better because if you're wanting to have a specific click on something, the click can sometimes be on the text, or it can be on the other thing, other elements inside there, whereas current target will be sort of the containing button that you're clicking on. But in this case, it doesn't seem to be making a difference. So that top and left might be relative to where the mouse has entered it. That's what I'm thinking is going on there. So let's try using X and Y instead and see how that makes it different. See what happens with that. Kind of the same thing. So the X and Y is, oh, I see why this is. So the pop-up has a profile image. That's what's going on here. So that's an interesting thing. So this pop-up has a profile image in it. And when I hover over this pop-up profile image, it puts it to its own position. So that's what's going on there. Let's fix that. A couple of ways we could do that. So we could change the class in here. We have this profile image. Let's do it this way. Yeah, let's give it a class of profile image no hover. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And that way, what we can do in here in our selector, we can say not profile image no hover. So then anytime we have a profile image that we don't want this to apply to, we can put that in there. Now I believe that should work. Yeah, so now I can hover over this and it doesn't do that. So that's the easiest way to solve that. The other way that we could have done it was rename that profile image on there, except that we're using it for styling, so that would be quite a bit of a process to do that. Another way we might have been able to do it would be to grab just the profile images that are in these two columns and that way we know, but that's a little bit less functional as well, because then if we do wanted to add something somewhere else, we'd have to also come back and exclude this. So this here just gives us the ability to add this no hover class to the profile image, and then it won't do the hover. And so now what we need to do is we actually want to, so we look at like, we're putting the top left of this. Let's go back to our left and top. You can see how that. So it kind of does it the same. But as you can see, it's putting it at the top left of the image itself. And we actually want it to show up below it. So we could kind of guess. We could just say we want this to be top plus, say, 50, and let's see what that looks like. How does Twitter handle it? So it's right below and actually to the left, so it kind of centers it. And does it do the same over here? I think I need to expand this more. Luke Liddell, 1994, thank you for the follow. Welcome to the stream. How are you doing today? I think that might. So the follower goal shows up, it doesn't seem to update. It's something I need to figure out on there, because for some reason it doesn't update the, let me see if I can do this, because I want it to show the correct number, because I believe that Luke Liddell, 1994, that may have put us at the 50 followers mark. Yeah, for some reason the goal will not show up correctly, so that's something I need to fix. But yes, we have hit 50 followers. Thank you, everybody who's here today for making this happen. We've hit the 50 follower mark, so I think in theory that hits the affiliate status. I believe it's not quite clear to me what the requirements are. So like there's the 4 things that you have to hit, which is 50 followers, streamed so many hours in the last 30 days, streamed consecutively or unique times in the last 30 days, and then have at least 3 viewers average. And we've hit all 4 of those. But it says over a 30-day period, so I'm not sure if now that starts that we have to continue for another 30 days, which I'm going to continue either way, so I'm excited for that. But either way, thank you all for the support. It's great to have you all here, and I'm glad that you have gained some useful information from here. That means that we'll be able to actually start adding channel points and creating emotes for the channel and having fun with that side of things. So I am excited to see where we can grow with that. If anybody has any ideas or thoughts for an emote, I think we'll probably eventually, I stream on Wednesday nights doing pixel art, so that's probably what we'll work on there. What was I doing? I think I need to go to here, and yeah, I wanted to see how these ones handle it. So same thing, so it shows the center. So we need to get the size of the pop-up. That's the other piece that we need to do. So in theory, the pop-up would be invisible. So let's actually show that too. Let's go to here, and let's change the style on the pop-up. So we've given it a width of 320 pixels, so we know that it's going to have a standard width. The height's going to adjust, but and we just give it a top and left to begin with. But we don't actually need to do that because we're only going to be setting it based on this function. But we will give it an opacity of 0, and we will give pointer events none, because we could do display hidden, but the problem with doing display hidden is that then you can't animate. You can't easily animate from display none or display hidden to display block. So we want this fade in that they have on Twitter. So when we hover over it, it kind of fades in and even like expands maybe a little bit. I think that's just because the content changing. So, but we want it to kind of fade in, and then after we've done all of the JavaScript and we get this kind of functioning, then we'll start to play with it and add some other things, like we can add some animations, we can add some color changes and theming and all that kind of stuff, to make it our own version of Twitter instead of an exact clone. But yeah, so I want the fade in to happen. So in order to do that, we need to make it opacity 0 so that we can fade to opacity 1. But with opacity, the element still shows up in the DOM, it's just hidden. So what that means is if I don't have this pointer events none, I can't click anything underneath it. So let's see if I can demonstrate that. Let's go back to here, and here we can see where that box is. So that's where it is right now. So we can see this hovers happening here when we hover over this, but not when we hover over top of this thing here, only when we get to here, because that's in the way. So if I just do the opacity 0, you can see it still has the hover, all of the mouse overs are happening from that pop-up, because it's actually still there in the DOM, and the hover doesn't happen until we get to here. So to fix that, we do pointer events none, not capital none. And that allows us to have it hidden from the DOM, and then we can still animate it. And because I want to actually animate when we change it, we'll give it a transition of opacity 0.3 seconds ease. And I'm actually just going to give it a left of, because you saw when we came in, it disappeared. Okay, so it should be okay because we have this opacity 0, but just to be safe, for whatever reason, if some browsers, it's good to account for, like, it works great in Chrome here, it works great in these other ones, but if this was in the DOM and it was showing, it would actually by default show up kind of at the bottom where it is in the DOM instead of this left. So I'm just going to actually give it a position of, say, 5,000 negative. And that way for sure it's off the screen as well. So until we actually say where we want it, this is where it'll be. It's not necessary, but it can be helpful. So then we actually want also so this is, this will be the element position, and then we want the pop-up position equals pop-up dot get bounding client rect, and the reason we want that is so that we can get the height and width of it, which we don't actually need right now because we are hard coding, but this is a good example here. So we know that the width is 320, but if for some reason, so if we just said we want the left to be the element position left minus what's half of 320 is 160. So that should put that in the center. And then what we need to do is style.opacity equals 1, and the style.pointer events. So there's the same thing where in CSS it's the pointer dash events, but JavaScript can't use the dashes in the style names or in the property names, so they use the camel case here. And this will be all. Oh, there I go with semicolons, because I was just doing CSS, and CSS does have semicolons, and I still do like the semicolons in CSS, so I guess it's just a whatever I'm feeling that day type of thing, maybe. So let's see if that works. So there we go. So we have that fade. Let's make it a little bit slower, just so we can see that. We obviously need to add more to the top. So let's just do that. We're adding 50. Let's add 100 just to get it way below. There we go. And so now you can see that this is the left, so we're lining it up with this, and then we're subtracting 160, half of the 320 width, which puts the center of this div in the center of this, but we actually want the center of this. So we do have the width of the element, so we want it to be minus 160, but plus the element position dot width divided by 2. And sometimes, so it's not too bad in here. If we had this expanded, we can kind of see it's easy to read, but something that can make it a little bit cleaner is we can just create variables for these. So element width equals width, and actually let's just do, because we know we just need half element width divided by 2, and that way we can, this is just personal preference too. I mean, there's some advantages to this. This allows me to see like what I might be using down below and then place them into here. It allows me to use it again if I need to. So either way of doing this is perfectly fine. This just keeps these a little bit shorter. JCruz40, thank you for the follow. How are you doing today? Nice to see you here. I hope you're well. So now when we do this, now you can see, so it's in the center. So it's more lined up with the center of the element. And we do want, what happens in Twitter if we hover? When we move away, it fades away. So we want to do that as well. So we'll need to add a mouse out as well. And this, we will just do the same thing. We'll add the event listener mouse out dot here's something too we might need to play with, so let's do this. So hide pop up, and this we don't really need to pass anything because this is going to be just a function that hides the pop-up. So let's just create that function, hide pop-up. And what it's going to do is basically the opposite of this. And we will also, just for consistency and safety, I would say, we will also put this back to that 5,000 pixels. Actually, you know what? We're not going to do that because then that will start animating. That'll move first to that 5,000 pixels, and then we won't see the animation remove. So we can combat that with JavaScript by saying move it over there after the animation has completed. But for the purposes of this, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Once it's on the screen, we know that the pointer events are hidden, so it doesn't really matter where it is. It's just that initial one in case it shows up during the load of the page that it's good to put that over there. So in this particular case, I think we'll be okay, and we'll set this to none. And so what that should do is when we're on here, if we move away, it's going to hide. Now, a couple of things that we want to do. We probably want to put a timeout on this, so when you remove it, when you move over, it doesn't just disappear automatically, because as you can see, we can't even get to the pop-up now. The other thing is that we need to have it when you're off of the pop-up, also have it. So a better way to do this might actually be we do want to do this, so no. We want to do pop-up.add event listener, mouse out, hide pop-up. And let's get rid of it from here for now. And what this allows us, so now we can, so mouse out. Mouse out gets triggered when you mouse over it, it looks like. So that's interesting. So let's actually just console log so it's actually being triggered twice when we go over it. So that's an interesting little thing that's happening there. One thing that I think, there's a few different ways, so there's different things that are happening here. What we basically need to do, so the way Twitter has it, when we hover over top of it, it shows up. If we move away, it goes away. If we move onto it, it'll stay. But if we move off of it, it'll go away. So we need to figure out when we're showing and when we're not showing. And there's tons of different ways that we can do this. So I'm going to pick one way and we'll play with it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we'll try something different. And feel free if you have any suggestions, if you've worked on something similar to this. It's a really interesting real-world problem to solve. This is something that comes up quite a bit with pop-ups, with like these hover type of things or tool tips that you want to do. So there's a few different ways that this can be solved. I think the approach I'm going to take is I'm going to set an interval when you mouse out from this, or when you when you mouse out from this. That basically says after a half a second, hide that pop out. Anytime you're hovering over an element or hovering over this pop-up, we will set that variable to true. When we mouse out, we'll set that variable to false. So let's just start with creating the variable. So we have this pop-up, we have the pop-up here, hide pop-up. So let's say let is hovering. And I want to be a little bit more specific with this, because obviously is hovering is a very generic term that could be used in a lot of different things. So I'm going to say is profile image hovering. And it seems like a bit verbose to have such a really long variable name, but in the end, especially with modern tooling now, a lot of variable names, when you minify things, they get shrunk down to tiny little names anyway. In most cases, you're better off to be a little bit more clear and verbose with your naming than than not. So don't be afraid to give long descriptive variable names. It's a little bit more to type, but same thing. Code hinting and code autocomplete is pretty good now. So once you type it once, you don't have to type it all out the whole entire way. So we'll say false to begin with. And what we're going to do is the hide pop-up will I want to try to stick to having the functions doing one thing. So this is something that I've been really, one of practice that I've been really working on lately is keeping the functions as clean as possible, doing one specific thing. So this particular function, all it does is change this. This function can be used to hide that pop-up. So I don't want it to do anything else. I do want to essentially just need to think about this for a minute. So essentially what I want to do is I want to have an event listener on the mouse out of the pop-up and on the mouse out of the images that starts a timer to call this hide pop-up function. So because it's going to be the same function on both of them, I'm going to call this start hide pop-up. And what it's going to do is do a set interval and we will hide the pop-up. Set interval. And it's going to just be a function, and it's going to say if is profile image hovering, and actually we want if not. So if we're not still hovering, then call hide pop-up. And that's going to happen, we'll give it a nice long, like 2 seconds to begin with. So then we basically need to call this start hide pop-up function on mouse out of the image and on mouse out of the pop-up. Then what we need to do is have the opposite. So when we mouse over the pop-up, we just want to basically set is profile image hovering to true. And then we want to do the same in the mouse over for the image. So we're doing this place pop-up. Let's change this into a full function. And we will say is profile image hovering equals true. Let's see if that works. And I'm going to also, let's just put some logging in here so we can see what's happening. Is profile image hovering? So we'll put this here and we'll actually say image so that we know that that's an image hover. In here we'll say, so if we want to have multiple lines, we have to turn it into we have to put in the brackets. So that's kind of the difference here too. So you can have the implicit return that basically all I'm doing is one thing, so we don't need these brackets in here. But if we want to add another line in here for the purposes of logging, especially right now, we just need to put in the curly brackets so that then we can have multiple lines in the function. And then this is the pop-up is hovering. And then let's just in here we'll say start hide, and we'll say what that is. And so that should give us a little bit of information about what's going on. This is real Twitter, we need this one. So we got our console here. Let's see what happens. We hover over here, pop-up shows up. It's still showing up. We're not getting our console logs, so that's interesting. We move over, so that it is working, it shows up. But we're not getting our console logs. Why is that? Maybe I need to resave. And refresh this. Oops, I'm on the wrong one. Oh, was that real Twitter? Was I on the real Twitter? Was that what was going on there? Yeah, that's exactly what was going on. I was on the real Twitter. Of course it was working. So image true, and we move over to here. So it started the hide, but because when it does that interval after 2 seconds, we're still hovering over here, and it's true again, it's not gonna hide. And we could move back to this image and it should do the same thing, but if we move off after 2 seconds, it's not working. So what we're missing here is we have to set it back to false on the mouse out. So here's our mouse out, start hide pop up. And so same thing, we need to turn this into a function. We might be able to clean this up after too. It's getting a little bit convoluted here, but let's just see. This is like, for what I find, like this is kind of the process. It's like, try these things, and if it's something that you've done a bunch of times, it gets a lot easier to do this. I haven't done pop-ups specifically like this for a while, so it's a little bit of trial and error, figure these things out. One thing that I'm working on is building a UI library with vanilla JavaScript, so pop-ups will be one of them. And then that way I've got that tool for other applications. So this might be kind of work that I'm doing to figure out this function of building this UI, and then it'll go into my library so that then going forward I can have, here's my functions that I need for doing a pop-up with this specific application. So there's, on the mouse out, we set the image hovering to false, and I think I have a better way to do this. So let's just see. This might not even work. So this I think we'll get it to work, but I think there's a cleaner way to do this. So start hide pop-up. We also need on mouse out here, we call this, we need to do the same thing. We set our is profile image to false. Now let's see if this works. Oh, and actually let's do the same thing here. And we will do the same thing. Oops, we want it after we change it. So here. And we do the same thing down here. No, we need to move this down here. So let's see if this works. So we hovered over the image, hovered over the pop-up. Because we're hovering over it, it's there, stays, we move away after 2 seconds. No go. What happens if we move on to here and then move away? So it's saying that it's false. We called start hide and it was false. So here's where so we might be able to get this to work. So essentially what I'm trying to do is have that variable set. When you hover over this, the thing pops up. When you move, it sets that variable. It's probably going to be taking some fine tuning to figure out where that's actually not working. So when we hide, this start hide, it's saying that it's false, even though, so here it's false. So it's not actually being set to true when I hover over here. It's always staying, so now it's saying true, but now it's saying false when I hover over. So on mouse over, this has to come after, and that's why that's not showing up. Still doesn't solve the problem, but so we say the pop-up is profile image is true. We go out, it's false, and we start this hide. If it's not, then hide pop-up. Oh, I have to actually call the function. And so just so that we know, let's do this too, to see what's happening here. Hiding. Oops, hiding. Now let's see what that's going. There we go. So now when we're over this here, we can click on here, we can unfollow, it's going to show. As soon as we move away, it's off. But you can see there's some glitches in there because basically that set interval is going to run with those 2 seconds. I think this could be fixed by changing this down to say 500, so half a second. What's ended up happening is that if I move off and I come back within the 2 seconds, that set interval is still queued up to run. So if I leave and then come back within those 2 seconds, it's still calling that and it doesn't know what's going on. So, and then we've got this time in between here where that set interval may have been called. We can't get to here. So we may be able to, that's why we can increase this to like 1,000 seconds, gives us more threshold to be able to get over to here. But see, obviously it's not the greatest experience. It's not working. And those set intervals, like I say, I think that's what's happening here, is that the set interval gets queued. So one thing we could try is basically if is profile image hovering, we just return. So that way that'll add so that it won't just call that set interval. It doesn't actually create that set interval unless you're not hovering. So that might fix it a little bit. So now when we come off, it hides. But it's not doing that wait, right? It's still, I think because the set interval is existing in there, it's going to be always calling those things. So then you get this backup of ones where it's trying to hide it, and then that way as soon as you move off, it's actually hiding right away. It's hiding, so it's calling that hiding. Set interval. Yeah, so it's creating that over and over again. See, it's hiding. And that's because set interval, which is being called, so this start hide pop-up is being called when on mouse out. Start hide pop-up is being called. So for some reason this on mouse out is being called over and over again. And that could be because we're actually out from this thing here, but I think we'll just change directions here a little bit. So rather than doing it this way, let's just detect where the mouse is, and we'll see if the mouse is over top of the pop-up or a profile image. And we can do that with just a mouse move on the document element. So let's go document dot add event listener mouse move check pop-up hover. And so we've already got our reference to the pop-up, and we will have, oops, check pop-up hover, yeah. Then we need this function check pop-up hover. It's going to take the event, and we will console log e dot let's figure out JavaScript mouse move coordinates. Yeah, client X, I think that's what we want, client X and client Y. Yeah, event.client X and client Y. So client X and client Y. So now we should see, as the mouse moving, we're seeing those coordinates down below. And we know where the pop-up is, so we have the pop-up dot get bounding client rect. And let's console log that out. And so this will give us the coordinates, which will give us our DOM rect that has the width and height, as well as the X and Y. And so when we do this, if we move, our X and Y should be pretty close. Where's the end of there? Our X and Y. Let's try mouse down. That way I think, is there a mouse leave as well? Let's check. Mouse leave. Yeah, I think this is what we actually want, mouse leave instead of mouse enter and mouse leave versus mouse. Event is fired at an element when the cursor of a pointing device, usually a mouse, is moved out of it. Yeah, so versus are similar, does not, in that mouse leave does not bubble and mouse out does. This means the mouse leave is fired when the pointer has exited the element and all of its descendants, whereas mouse out is fired when the pointer leaves the element or leaves one of the element's descendants, even if the pointer is still within the element. So that's, I think, what was happening here with our, we were doing mouse out. We probably needed to change this to mouse leave. So sorry, I kind of switched back, but I just thought of something here. Mouse leave, mouse enter, mouse enter, and mouse leave. I just wanted to see if this would make a difference. So we're still getting some of the same issues. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure what's going on there. So obviously that's not working either. So we do need the start hide pop-up. And we do need to clear the interval. That's the other piece. Set timeout. And yeah. We were using set interval, which continues. I think I got those two mixed up this time. So set interval will run run over and over again. Set timeout runs once. There we go. Now we got it figured out. Okay, that was my bad. So set timeout, I don't know why I spaced that. So set timeout runs once, and then it's done. Set interval, which totally makes sense, runs in intervals of this amount. So it'll continue to happen over and over again. So we actually have this functioning pretty good now. I think I will keep this. So sorry for some of the confusion in that. So let's just clean this up. And review what we've changed here, because there was a bunch of stuff that was kind of happening in there that made things a bit confusing, I'm sure. We don't need to check the pop-up hover anymore. So what I was going to switch to was on the mouse moves, we see if the mouse is over top of this element. If it is, keep it open. If it isn't, then start that timer. So it's essentially the same thing that we're doing, except that instead of doing it on the document and the mouse move, we can get rid of that. We do need our pop-up. This is our reference to the window. And we do need our if the profile image is hovering variable. Possibly. Let's see if we can get rid of this. Let's see if we can clean this up. I'm only going to comment things out first. We're going to do that. We'll start the hide pop-up. We'll get rid of some of these console logs because we don't need them now. Oops. Oops, oops, oops. We might not need this. I just want to see, because there was two things at play. We were one, I put set interval instead of set timeout, so that caused it to be running over and over again. And then the second part was we added in this is profile image hovering. No, sorry. We do still need to know if it's hovering. So I'm going to leave it like this. if it is hovering, we can just return, because we don't need to worry about it. If it isn't hovering, we start the timer, and then at the end of the timer, so this is when it runs, so after 1.5 seconds, it runs this code. If the profile image is not hovering, then we hide the pop-up. Let's move this reference up to here with our other pop-up. And then we will need the variable, we will need to set that. And so this is for the pop-up itself. When we leave, we set that it's not hovering, and we start the hide pop-out. Whenever we enter it, we set that the profile image is hovering. And we've switched to mouse leave and mouse enter versus mouse over and mouse out, because what happens is mouse leave only gets triggered when I leave this parent div, the one that has the event listener. Now it gets triggered. Whereas mouse out actually gets triggered every time I move off of something, even within the div. It's mouse out, mouse out, mouse out, mouse out. And mouse on happens anytime I move on to something. So that caused problems, because then we had that set interval, which was trying to check all the time, and that's why we had down below, we could see that hiding all the time, because it was continuing to add those in there. So now we only see the information change once. So that's the mouse leave and mouse enter. So that's a good place of learning there. Then we've got our place the pop-up function. This just allows us to place the pop-up and show it there. I'm going to do a little bit of changing in here. We are getting the dynamic width of the element, but I do want to dynamically decide whether or not I have to put it below or above. So here we would need to put it above because we can't see it. And obviously there's a big amount of space below too. So I think we can do the same thing here for the height. And actually we want the whole element height. We don't want the half element height. We want the element height plus above her. So let's do height, and let's just do a buffer of, say, 25. So this is just a distance buffer. Let's just say spacing 25. So now we need the top. We actually want the element top plus the element height plus spacing. And that'll change whether we go top or bottom, but for now that should give us it should show up just 25 pixels below. And so that way we can change this, so say we only want it to be 20. That's interesting. So element height we want the top plus the height plus the spacing. Let's just make it 50. So there must be margin or padding up above this here, so it's getting the full element there. So that gives us that spacing. Gives us a little bit of spacing underneath, and that's all working. And then that's dynamic based on the element. So if we have, like, this one's a bit smaller, it's still going to show up the same. I think 50 might be a little bit too much. 40. Let's give it 40. Yeah, that looks good. And then it'll be relative to, so see this one's a little bit smaller. If we had one that was way bigger, it would still be in reference to that. So using it programmatically instead of doing it hard-coded. Now we've got this 160 because we just took the width because we know that we're setting this to 320. But let's say we wanted to make it a little bit more dynamic and more reusable. We would use the pop-up position, and actually I'm going to change this because it's not actually just the position, it's let's call it element rect and pop-up rect. And one thing in VS Code, if you're using VS Code, if you select the first one, you can press Control D, and it'll select the next one, and then you can paste all of them at the same time. So that's a nice, helpful technique. And we haven't used the pop-up rect yet, but we're going to use that here, and we're going to say we want to do the same thing here. Let's just move this down. We'll keep our element constants separate from our pop-up constants, and here we want the width divided by 2, and this will be pop-up or half pop-up width, and we'll set that as the variable. And that way, if we wanted to change the styling, so let's say we wanted this to be now 720 pixels, it's still going to show up halfway. So that way, no matter what, if this pop-up changes sizes, we're still always going to be in the center of that div. So that's why it's always really good to use variables and to get the pop-up data directly instead of hard coding it based on what you have in the styles. So I'll have this back to 320. And so we got about 20 minutes left. Let's see if we can figure out the top and bottom portion. So we don't really have a way. We will leave this console up because that should give us the bottom. So let's find out. Let's get rid of those console logs first. And so here's our same thing. So we're doing on all of the profile images, we're adding an event listener for mouse enter that sets the profile image hovering to true and places the pop-up at the current target based on the current target. And then we have our mouse leave. So when it leaves that, we set the profile image hovering to false, and then we start the hide pop-up. So I'm going to create a function that determines top or bottom. So function determine up or above or below, and it will take in the pop-up. And let's create another function called show pop-up that just does this. And then we can call that here, show pop-up. The reason that I do this is because each of these different things might be something that you want to call individually, whether you want to show it or hide it. And so this is actually the placing the pop-up. So it's actually putting the pop-up where it needs to go based on the element that you pass in. And then it'll show the pop-up. So this is getting the left and top, and then basically based on, so the left is going to be, well actually that's a good point. So left is going to be the same thing. We need to know if it's close to the edge, but we won't worry about that. We're not going to worry about that. I don't know what Twitter does. In this particular case, we've got this short here. So they move it over. So they do the same thing from left to right as well. So if it's too close to the edge, and that would be a good practice to put into place. But let's do top and bottom and not worry about the left and right. And we should be able to apply the same concept to the left and right. But essentially, we need to know if the placing of the element, if the element plus the height of the element is lower than the distance between the top and the bottom, if that makes sense. So I'm going to change this. We've got show pop-up, hide pop-up. Let's just do all the functionality in here, and then we might move some stuff around. We've got access to that. So we do need to know the bottom, how far from the bottom. Let's just get the element rect and see what we get from there. So bottom is 273, and I believe that's bottom. Let's see what happens now. Did bottom change? Bottom is still 273, so we can't use that. So we need to figure out how to determine the distance to the bottom of the screen. Get distance to bottom of viewport. JavaScript. Get element distance. So we can do scroll top, which that gets the distance to the top, which is good, but offset top, window.innerHeight. So you can calculate the space between your element and the bottom of the page by calculating element.offset top and window.innerHeight. So let's take a look at that. We have our element, and let's see what this looks like when we do offset top. And let's see if that lines up with the top. $35. Offset top is 35. That doesn't even make sense. Oh, because it's relative. Yeah, okay. So it's 35 from the top of its parent container. That's the tricky part. So we actually need the top from the top of the page. So let's see what happens if we move this to here. We're getting top is 223. If we move it to here, top is 45, yeah. Okay, so we'll use top, not offset top, because it's a relatively positioned element. We'll use the element rect.top, and we will window dot inner height. It should give us, the inner height is 330, the top is 239. So if we say the top minus, let's do window height equals this, and then if we say window height minus the top, and what we'll do today, because we only got 10 minutes left, is we'll just try to output whether it should go above or below. So we got 90. If we do this, we have 246. So essentially what we need to know is if we need to know the pop-up rect dot height plus the element rect dot top so let's see what that looks like. That's 9. This is 203. If we go like this, negative 101. So if it's a negative number, and let's add the buffer in there as well. So the spacing, we'll just use the same spacing, just to give us a little bit of room. So if all of these things, if the window height minus all of these things is a negative number, then it needs to go above position equals this. Whoops, where did I go? Position this. So then we're going to say console.log position greater than 0. We will log below, otherwise above. So this should be below, yeah, lots of room for it. This one, below, lots of room for it. This one, above. So there we go. So that gives us whether or not we're doing above or below. And what we can do is just put this right into here. Let's just put this. Let's say this will be position, this will be distance to bottom. And we'll say if the distance to bottom is greater than 0, then we put it below or above. And then we can say if position equals below. Gingerbeard, good afternoon. How are you doing? You're here just for the last 5 minutes or so. I might stick around for a little bit longer than the last 5 minutes. We're just finishing up here, but nice to see you. How are you doing? How was your weekend? Else. So if the position is below, that's our standard, what we've already done here. But if the position is above, and we can do the same thing for the left and right. So we can do, well, I won't get ahead of myself, below and above first. Then the position left is always going to be the same, but the top, instead of being the element top plus the element height plus the spacing, we're going to do the opposite. So the element top minus the height minus the spacing. And I think that will work for us. You're good? No, dang, how are you? I am doing good. Just continuing on this Twitter build here. So we took Twitter, so this is something we've been working on this is day 7 of this project, just using an existing system, Twitter, to teach basic coding. So we're basically recreating the front-end development of Twitter using super basic techniques. So we started with the HTML and CSS over the first 6 days, which brought us to here. And now today we've been working on the JavaScript side of things. So we had on live Twitter, we have this pop-up that shows up when you hover over somebody's image. And so we created that same functionality when you hover over it. And now we're just working on the positioning. So obviously there's some stuff that we just worked on that's not quite working, but that's essentially what we've been doing, is getting this positioning to show up. When you move away, it disappears. Very cool. Yeah, thank you. And all of this that we've created is just in these 3 files: the index HTML, main.js, and style.css. And if you're interested in seeing the code itself, there's a GitHub repository that I've updated each week, so you can see kind of first week what we did, second week what we did. Was that hard to achieve? Hello, Isolated Ace. Nice to see you. What language? So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's all we're doing. Just basic functionality. We're not getting into any frameworks or advanced languages. My whole entire reason for doing this specific series was to show how much functionality you can do with super simple basic just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the index HTML is just our markup. So there's a good chunk of code in here, but it's all pretty simple. So at some point we might go through and clean it up and rename some things, but we're really just taking the basic elements in here. We're using Font Awesome for the icons here, and we're using here. And so obviously there is some differences. So these are the official Twitter icons, and we're using Font Awesome icons. There wasn't exactly the ones that were available, but pretty close. And then for the text, we're just using some sample text from, this one's Lorem Ipsum, and this one's Lorem Hipster Ipsum, I think it is. So it just takes like random hipster-ish words and throws them into there. And then for the images, we're using a site called PlaceBeard. So there was PlaceKitten, which you could use a URL and it will just randomly generate a kitten for you, a picture of a kitten. And just to make it more relevant to Ginger, I'm sure you'll appreciate this if you haven't been on the stream in the morning here. So PlaceBeard, you can go to the URL and you can give 2 different dimensions, and it will give you an image with those dimensions. And PlaceBeard specifically is random images of guys with beards. And so that's where all these, so each time we refresh each of these images, the ones that are the same will stay the same, but each of these other ones will be a random guy with a beard. Then we moved into the styles, so this is the CSS. So when you build, after you build HTML, then you write CSS, which is cascading style sheets, which basically outlines how things are displayed, what colors they are. We use a technique of creating variables up here for the colors, so if we wanted to change the color across the board, we could. So instead of using the Twitter blue up here, we could maybe go to this yellow, and then automatically everything on the site's going to be, everything that it was that blue will be that new yellow. So that's a nice way to theme things instead of having to put it all into, have to go back through the code and adjust the colors all the way through. Sweet, yeah, thanks. And then we've gotten into the JavaScript, and that's essentially all of this stuff here was just in that index HTML and CSS. And it's got mobile styling, so when you shrink down, things change. The icons just come up, the right column disappears, which is in alignment with the same way that Twitter happens. When we shrink in, we get rid of these. Eventually this sidebar disappears. So it's same functionality. And now we're working on this hover. So when you hover over it, when you move away, eventually it disappears. And obviously our top, we just started working on determining if it needs to show up above or below. So before we added this last bit of code here, it was always showing up, where is this, below? It was always just showing up like this. And with that, it will show up with the spacing below. And now I notice that this, our spacing is 40. We have our element height. Let's change this now to 20 and see if that's better. Yeah, that looks better. So now there's just 20 pixels below this that it shows up. But obviously when you're down below here, it's going to show up below the screen. So we need to know if you're above or below, which we just wrote this function here that detects that. We should be able to see position. And so then down in the console here, that will log this one should actually be above, this one should be below, this one should be below. And for some reason, it's making things wonky. So that's where we're at with this position. Let's log it only on the inside here. So this should show us which part of these code blocks is running. So when we do this, the top one should be below, that's correct, and then this one should be above. But for some reason, let's just put the bottom minus the spacing and see how that looks. So we're taking the pop-up div and setting the bottom to whatever the element that we're hovering over is top minus our spacing element here. And I don't know, I must have undone that 20. And let's see if that works better. So obviously that's putting it way up above there. This one, and there's definitely some wonky things going on now. That shows up correctly, that shows up correctly. And something's going on. Excerpt from hell, thank you for the follow, I appreciate it. Nice to see you. How are you doing today? so something's definitely going wonky here. So I'm going to put the same in both of these so that in theory it should look exactly the same no matter if it's above or below, just to determine if there's something going on. So that does work. So I think using the bottom's not going to work because it moves it up, but then the content goes through it. So I think we need to still style the top, but instead of it being above, let's just for now set it to the top of the element, so it should be in line with whatever you're hovering over. I actually just recently built a mini Twitter clone in React. Cool, but I'm doing well. How about me? Yeah, I'm doing really good as well. We're getting close to the end of the stream here. I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer and keep going. But typically I stream Monday from 10 till noon on Pacific time, and it's 12:04 here now. We've been working on this Twitter clone for about 6 or 7 days now on the stream, and we may take it into React. I typically do React development, but this was an exercise in learning basics, practicing the basics, and showcasing some stuff that we can do with just HTML and CSS. Just the front end, no functionality. Yeah, exactly. This is just the front end. So for now anyway, the purpose of this stream is to teach front-end development. So we may, sometime I may do another stream that's more back-end development, but my favorite part is the front-end development, and I think it's a good place for people to start learning to code as well. Looks really good, thank you. What was the purpose for your doing your React Twitter clone? Was it a learning exercise? So yeah, so now when it's below, you can see the positioning is showing up exactly on there. So we do need to do minus the oh, it was the element height, that's why, okay. We need the pop-up height. So pop-up height equals pop-up dot height. And just to keep it in alignment with this, I'm going to move the spacing just because it's not related. So I'm kind of just grouping these things. It's just for my own reference. This is spacing. These are all related to the element that you're hovering over. These are all related to the pop-up. And these are all related to the window and positioning. So I don't feel like necessarily I need to put comments in here. It could get a little bit messy in that way. I think it's just a simple way of organizing things. You could also put these things together. It may not make sense to somebody looking at it. So if I'm the one looking at this, so I'm going to, it makes sense to me, but if I was passing this off to somebody else, I may put comments in here with the spacing, because that's actually kind of related to sort of spacing as well. But I think if you kind of look at it logically, you might figure out that this is related to the pop-up, this is related to the element, and then this is all the rest of the stuff. And then we're determining if the position needs to be below or above, and then that sets our top to minus the pop-up height, and then minus, minus the pop-up height, and then minus the spacing. And I think that will give us what we're looking for. So this still works the same. This one, interesting. It does not give us what we're looking for. Just learning, cool. Yeah, backend in Node and Express, the front end in React Redux with Material UI for styling. Cool. I've learned a lot about different frameworks affecting Google page rankings. What are your thoughts on that? Or is vanilla HTML, CSS, JS just the best default way to go? Yeah, so the single page application architecture of React apps, that's kind of the thing that makes it challenging for people because it's browser side rendered. So as the crawlers get to the sites, and I think Google's working on this because the technology, the tech stack is pretty popular. What happens is that Google gets to the site and it just gets the index.html page, which is really nothing because the JavaScript hasn't rendered yet. So it doesn't know what's on the page and it can't really crawl it. So there's definitely things that happen with that. There's some techniques you can use, like creating an index page that has sort of all your content on it that forwards to your single page app is one approach that you could do. And then still having your sitemaps and still having all those things are ways that you can combat that. Additional pushing, so like your advertising on social media, and that still will up your ranking, but the general crawling, it does certainly have a hit on that. But if you use something like Gatsby or Next.js or things that server-side render and then have a static site, then you're outputting HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So ultimately, that's your best case scenario from a Google ranking standpoint, is to have basic HTML and CSS and JavaScript for a few different reasons. One, it can crawl it very easily. It knows HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's what it was designed to read. And also, it's extremely fast. So like if you can move the frameworks away from it, that's why something like Svelte is a really like interesting one to follow to see how that's going, because Svelte is a framework that compiles itself away. So at the end of the day, you are just serving basic HTML and JavaScript. So, and React kind of does that. You're still using the library, but it does output basic JavaScript at the end of the day. But same thing, at the end of the day, you are writing HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to create the web. It's just whether you're using a framework to support that or not. Is that clear? Makes sense? Yeah, cool. So we're still let's try this. These are kind of the math portions of coding that sometimes can just be playing around with. That one shows up below, and I'm not sure why this one won't hover. And for some reason, it's still not moving it up far enough. So we do have the height of the pop-up. We want to take that and move that up the page. We have our height plus our spacing. And we subtract that from the top of the element. So let's try what's happening here mathematically. So if our rectangle top is at, say, 200 pixels, and then we're subtracting the height of the pop-up, say it's 200 pixels, and then so this will be 220 if we add the spacing. Then that's going to put the top up the page. Let's get some logging going here. We need our element rectangle and our pop-up rectangle. So we're just here for a few more minutes. I'm just finishing up. I want to get this top and bottom thing to work here, and then we'll probably be calling it for the day. So that's showing up above. Interesting. This particular one here must not have, no, it does have the profile image. I'm not sure why. Oh, there we go. But let's move this. So that's actually showing up correctly now. This shows up below this. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So there must be something in the timing of things that is messing it up. So this would be our hover, which would be at 417, and then our height is 237. Top's 417. Our height is 237, so our top theoretically would be 417 minus 237. If we put the top at the top, this should put it exactly at the top. Then if we do, say, minus 100, it should put it 100 pixels above. And that is true. So perhaps the pop-up height okay. Let's log what we're calculating here. See why this might be displaying funny. Not a number, okay. So something is being calculated incorrectly. Pop-up height equals the pop-up, that's where it is. Pop-up rect dot height. All of this because of one little mistake like that. That's coding, folks. There we go. Minus spacing. So just in case didn't catch it, I had pop-up dot height here. Pop-up refers to the element itself, the pop-up element. It doesn't have a height property. I could have done dot inner height, that would have got it too, but we've got this element bounding client rect, which gives us the height property. So I had to reference it off of that, not off of the element itself. That's why when we finally output that variable, that's why outputting variables is always a helpful thing. I saw that it was not a number, which meant that I wasn't getting an actual height. There we go. So now this shows up above and below. So I can now get rid of my console logs. And so on the next week, we'll go through and we'll implement, I'm gonna make this, we'll probably have a below a position, vertical position and a horizontal position, and then we'll specify the left and right as well. We'll apply the same technique to the left and right positioning on the page, and that'll be what we do on our next week. I'm just gonna see if anyone is streaming, see if we want to raid anyone. But thank you everybody for coming, for whoever's still in the chat there, hanging out. I hope you learned something, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for your support in our reaching 50 followers. It's been awesome to do that, so I'm excited to see where we can go from here and create some emotes and build the community even further. Feel free to reach out to me on Facebook, Twitter, on here. I stream on Mondays from 10 till noon on Pacific time doing coding, and then on Wednesdays I do pixel art and game dev Wednesday nights from 5 till 7 on 5 to 7 Pacific time as well. So thank you all, and I hope you have a good rest of your week. That is all. Doesn't look like there's anyone specific to raid currently, so that I'm aware of. So we'll just leave it at here. We've only got a few people in there too. So, but go check out some other cool streamers. Vimlark's really good. White Vault's really good. Cup of Joe. These are all some of the people that I've connected with quite a bit and enjoy their streams, and a handful of others. So I hope to see you next time. Peace. Much love.